Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Friday, August 28th meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Working Group. This meeting is being conducted remotely under the COVID-19 guidelines. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Working Group will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Westborough's website at town.westborough.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner: on Westborough TV, broadcast on the cable stations, as well as live streamed on their website and on YouTube. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time by technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of Westborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meetings. I'm showing that right now the entire committee is present with the exception of Jennifer Giuliano, who had a conflict this morning, and Valeria Mayo at this point. Also, we are joined by Leah McLean, who's volunteering with us, and we may have some additional volunteers joining in. John Gelchik, who's been attending this, has a work conflict this morning, is unable to attend. Our first order of business on the agenda, well, let me go over the agenda for the viewing public. We start today with a discussion vote on approval of minutes. Following that, and times are approximate here, as folks know, we've divided our work into three areas: community, governance, and operations. We'll start with the community team, provide an update on co-urbanizing the next steps. We'll discuss community outreach and ideas and actions. We'll then move into governance, and Hank and Steve have worked on an initial overview of governance. We'll discuss some of those components and oversight options. We'll then do a review of the most recent draft of the report that Ed is pulling, taking the charge and pulling together, which is the analysis, recommendations, and actions report. And so he'll walk through the updates there and solicit feedback. So Amy's saying she's only able to be here till 8:30 this morning. That's fine. We'll get to you in just a second. At the end of the meeting, we'll discuss other business. We'll talk any next steps and review action items, and we have been doing pretty well about adjourning on time. I plan to do that today as well. So the first order of business is approval of the minutes of our August 21st meeting. Do I have a motion?
I so moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion, corrections, comments on those minutes? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to a roll call vote. Mr. Durrett.
Durrett, yes.
Ms. Dwyer.
Yes.
Mr. Bain.
Bain, yes.
Mr. Roche.
Roush, yes.
Roush, sorry about that.
That's fine.
And, Valeria's joined us. Ms. Moya.
Yes.
And Edinburgh, yes. Okay, and so it passes, I got to count really quick, passes 6-0-0, 6 being present. Okay, so on to the first order of business is an update on co-urbanize. And talk about the next steps. So we are today expected to finalize the content on the initial rollout of the co-urbanize community engagement site. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at the preview link and, and poke around. We got a couple of comments back. The folks at COPE, because the page on housing affordability is a manually built page, it's not part of the automated template. And where we got the graph images, they're having trouble making those a little bit larger. So I'm working with them today to try and recapture that data or even rebuild those charts so that they'll be more legible and that they'll render better on mobile devices. So that hopefully will be cleaned up by end of day today. Additionally, Leah had pulled together an initial list, and she and I worked together. We've got a list of frequently asked questions, some which we generated, others we pulled from other project sites about affordable housing, and we're able to pull in with some of those the data we pulled in from some of the other sites. We're actually able to refer to some studies and things of that nature. So a reminder that part of the goal of the FAQs in the site is to bust some of the myths about affordable housing. So we actually have links to a couple of reports and studies on the fact that affordable housing, when properly done, not only does not lower property values in the surrounding area, it might actually help increase them. And so it's a benefit to the community, and there's some reporting on overall economic benefits of having affordable housing in your community as well. And so we'll bust some of those myths. So those will get added to the site. We'll submit them to the folks at Co-Urbanize to add to the site today. Once that's in, I'm going to replace some of the images in the image scroll, and then I think we're ready to go to the preview. Ed has sent me, I've got a list of names for the preview. Ed has sent me some overlap there. So again, if you want to identify people in the community who are influencers, clearly we're going to hit key stakeholders in the community. But if you have other, people who are influential, who you think should preview, who could provide answers to our initial 5 questions and start the engagement process, please email me those names today. And once the site is ready to go, I'll send out the preview invites. And the folks at Co-Urbanize and Mass Housing Partnership have given us some template emails to do that as a way of introducing the concept of the engagement site. And so we're tapping into their best practices. Okay, so with that said, I want to move on, and Amy sort of stepped up to take the lead on the community side of things, so let me hand off to her for a brief update.
So kind of what I've done has been basically talking to people. Kind of community members that are landlords, community members that are people that have lived in the community for a long time, and just tried to set the expectation about what's been going out there. And I think what you started to touch on earlier is debunking those myths of it's going to hurt property values. I think people picture these big concrete projects, if you will. And getting rid of that mental image and understanding that it could be beneficial to everybody is really just changing people's mindsets around it.
Okay. Has there been any thought about and discussion about who we might reach out to as far as organizations to present to? And do you have a list we can start pulling together?
Yep, I do. I can send that over to you.
Okay, if you could send that over. I was, as I mentioned on our meeting last Friday, I was invited to sit in with the housing subcommittee for the Master Plan Advisory Committee. And basically the discussion there was how can we help each other. The leader of that subcommittee, Kara Presley, is also chair of, she oversees Westborough Youth and Family Services, and she's chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. She's interested in having us come present to both of those committees, the Youth Council and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, so we should include those on the list of outreach. and we can start building. So Amy will send that over, and then we can start planning the outreach as well. Other parts of outreach we spoke earlier as a team on the to-do list is to get on the agendas of the Advisory Finance Committee and the Planning Board as well. And the timing of that we'll work on is whether we go in and just do a general presentation or whether we wait to do the presentation when we have warrant articles. I'll reach out to the chair. I don't know if Hank, you being on Advisory Finance Committee, if you want to.
I can get it scheduled onto the Finance Committee agenda.
And also just find out when the best time would be. Is it when we have warrant articles, or do they want, you know, to have some time just to talk about things conceptually before we come before with, you know, the warrant articles? Okay, so Hank will help arrange that. Okay, you know, once the site goes through the preview process and we have some initial engagement on the site, obviously we'll launch it publicly, and that'll be a large part of our community engagement. You know, unfortunately, you know, I still need to, I've reached out to a couple of organizations in town. They're not meeting as often virtually as they did when they were meeting live in person. So getting in front of some of the community groups might be a challenge, but, you know, we'll make that effort.
Alan, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
You know, my background is kind of marketing based. So in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, how do we reach so many people is through social media. And even if you did some sort of, like if we created a Facebook page and then you can do targeted Facebook ads and run it so that all these people are coming in, and it's a very low budget item, but you're drawing people to the landing page, which in turn is the website, and you're drawing people there to take action.
Okay, I'm just making some notes. So I can check.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly we should be able to create our own Facebook page for the trust. I'm not sure long term if that's going to be needed, or whether we just have the town of Westborough post on that Facebook page.
Yep.
And then obviously get it out to, you know, there's some very, you know, very active, you know, well-read Facebook groups that cover large segments of different aspects of the population. There are probably 8 or 10 of them right now,
Right.
and get people to cross-post and do that. But that's a great idea.
Alan, in terms of schedule, my guess is we have between 6 and 10 weeks between now and the fall town meeting. 6 weeks would put it, you know, relatively the end of October. 10 weeks would put it before Thanksgiving. To me, those are the two likely time frames. So we got to roll this out real fast. And one of the things I've done in the past is, if we had a what I call a canned slide set, you know, 4 to 10 slides, each one of us could be assigned to go get on the agenda of various groups, the Rotary, the you know, whatever groups, with a canned presentation. And that way you can cover a lot of ground in 6 to 10 weeks.
That's a great idea. Who would like to help pull together a slide presentation?
I'd be happy to work on it if.
Okay. Excellent. So Ed, why don't you and I pull that together? I mean, I think we have a lot of the information we need to create a good story arc through a presentation. You know, what is housing affordability? How affordable is Westborough? Why, you know, what's a trust? Why do we need it? What's it going to do? How's it going to benefit the community? And sort of tell, you know, maybe not 4, probably closer to 10, but, you know, tell that story that gets to the point where at the end of the slides, people are like, oh, that makes sense. Let's support that.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to go to town meeting and get the town meeting to approve setting up a trust. That's the key pivot point of this whole activity.
Right, and we would definitely need a presentation there.
Well, and we need to convince people going to town meeting that why is there a need for a trust and what's a trust going to do for the town?
Yep, agreed.
Do we think a video would be appropriate?
I'm not sure whether the groups we're looking to address are looking for videos or looking for real people to talk to them and answer questions. I really don't know. Again, my experience is a bit dated. I'm the pre-video age, where what folks wanted was somebody to come talk to them that looked like a real person and could answer questions after giving them a brief story.
Mm-hmm.
So, if only we still had the party line phones, right? You could talk to all your neighbors at once. Okay. No, I'm not sure. We need a video. We have been invited for a future episode of Frank and Mary in Westborough, and that could be a good time to go through the create a video of that presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could certainly do a video of the presentation ourselves and record that and put it on the website, the town website, as well as the Co-Urbanize site, is a way to let people see the presentation that we're making to different folks as well. So we'll get it. I think that's a good idea as well. First, we need the slide deck.
I think that Hank has got a point here, and that is that, as far as town meeting action is concerned, it's quite concise. And I think, the bigger picture of what the trust will do in the future and how it will operate, I think is a information that probably is due after the fact. I think if we focus simply, why do we want the town to vote for a trust, affordable housing trust, and what will it do for the town are the 2 points to get this voted at town meeting. I think all the details that we're talking about, and certainly, down in the weeds here, isn't going to be interesting to the town. I think, targeted point presentation of affordable housing and why. I mean, given the fact that there's significant amount of money that can be used to create affordable housing, I think that in and of itself should be enough to sell the idea that the town wants to have a trust.
Okay, I agree. We'll definitely keep the presentation focused on those two points. Why what it does, why we want one, why we need one, per se, and how's it going to benefit the town and the community. So thinking about the timing, as well as long as that was mentioned, there was discussion at this week's Board of Selectmen's meeting about rescheduling town meeting. The final decision, I believe, is going to be made at the September 8th Board of Selectmen's meeting. However, it appears the most likely scenario will be it being moved to start Monday, November 9th. Because that would provide enough time for town meeting to complete so that the tax rate can be set by the end of November, which is necessary to get the Q3 or the Q2, I forget which Q, tax bills out on time. I believe it's the Q3 tax bills out on time.
Correct.
So I think it's safe for us to sort of plan and work back. I can take an action item to sort of talk with the town manager and get a sense of if that's going to be town meeting, when does the warrant close, when would we have to make formal presentations for warrant articles to the Board of Selectmen and advisory FinCom. Ed, you're going to get that information. Hank, you're going to get that information for us. And also I'll reach out to Mark Silverberg on the planning board to give him a heads up that we'll want time on one of their meeting agendas to garner their support for our initiative as well.
Yeah,
Alan,
kind
I
of
have
a
a-
rough outline of schedule. If you're going to have a meeting the 9th of November, we've got to have all of our work done, our influencing work done by the end of October.
Okay.
That may give you, that may be a week sooner than you might be able to slop over to the first week in November, but you certainly can't be still trying to influence people the week of town meeting. So that gives you till the end of October, which is like 8 weeks,
Okay.
8 or 9. I'm having trouble counting the weeks.
It's it is all a blur. So
I have a question, Alan.
Yes, go ahead.
Are we locked into the same scheme of things that we were for the annual, which was, based on the fact that it's on the books to be done at a certain time, and warrant articles have to be created and posted for that original schedule, and then when things were delayed, I mean, stuff was submitted for town meeting and on the normal schedule of things. Are we bound by the same process here, i.e., that the fall town meeting is scheduled for, say, the 15th of October, and now it's going to be delayed, but the information associated with it is still due in September, kind of question?
Well, so for fall town meeting, because it actually hasn't been scheduled yet, if on September 8th the Board of Selectmen set the date to November 9th, then that would determine that the warrant has to be published 14 days before November 9th. We would not still be working off the deadlines for a third Monday in October session. The deadlines would shift. In the spring, it was different because there wasn't legislation that allowed us to move town meeting. And so the actual postponement of town meeting happened after the warrant was posted.
Yeah, and fall town meeting is a special, not an annual, so it's not
It can come at
required
any
to
time.
happen.
Yeah,
It happens because we need it, not because it's mandated.
right. And it's a special town meeting format because it follows the annual town meeting format with respect to quorum.
Right.
And it's in the charter as usually is the word,
Right.
which gives us some flexibility there. It's usually held on the third Monday of October. So, knowing that we're going to put together and start doing outreach to the community, it's probably good for us as a team to review that before we start, and we want to get started soon. Should we plan on meeting next Friday and then go back to our every other Friday meetings rather than waiting until the 11th for our next meeting?
I think it's good to meet if people can, just to keep this momentum going, because Hank's pointed out, we're on a tight schedule to really get information out to people as well as to complete all the work we need to do, in preparation.
Okay. Is there anyone who wouldn't be able to meet on next Friday?
Me.
Okay.
It's the long weekend, so.
That's true. Okay. So is there, I guess I'm asking for, is there a show of thumbs up or yea or nay? Is there consensus about a meeting on next Friday then, rather than waiting till the 11th?
I'm okay meeting next Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with it too, because although many of us are probably going to be somewhere else, but since we can do this with a computer, it's easy to do it from wherever you are. And, particularly since it's in the morning, it works okay. So I'm good
Yeah.
for that.
Okay, then I will get an agenda out and get that posted. And then we can decide at that point if we still need, hopefully at that point, we'll have made some review today, and that meeting will make some decisions and finalize a few things. We can decide if we still need to meet weekly or go back to bi-weekly or skip a week, whatever. I know the pace is fairly aggressive and intense for everyone here, and I appreciate everyone's time and commitment. Next, anything else with respect to community before we move to governance? Okay, then moving on to governance. Hank and Steve put together what will go into sections 4 and 5 of our report, as well as set the guidelines for the wording of the Declaration of Trust. And so I'm going to turn it over to Hank and Steve to present, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Yeah, I think everybody has a copy of the draft. That basically, one of the key things to remember is most of the things that are most of the governance issues for a housing trust are set by statute. So there's not a lot of flexibility in the powers of the trust. So many, I mean, if you haven't read Chapter 44B, 44B, I believe it is, it's worth taking a quick pass through, because it really tells you a lot of, if you read a whole bunch of trust documents, they all begin to look the same because they're all basically copying the statute and echoing what the statute says. There are, the key, from my perspective, the key leverage of having a trust is that the trust can be the owner of real property. You can receive funding from the community from a variety of sources. You can use that money to buy real property, and you can then resell that real property. So that first part, powers of the trust: accept and receive real property, personal property, money, etc. That's statute. The trust can also borrow money. In other words, you can cut a mortgage if you have some real property, or you can borrow against it. This gives the trust some leverage. The fact, I believe, I'm not positive of this, but I believe that if the trust borrows money, it's guaranteed by the community. But using trust assets, you can only borrow against trust assets. You can't borrow against the full credit of the town of Westborough. You can only borrow against the assets you have, i.e., basically some kind of a mortgage.
Correct.
The trust can purchase property, they can retain it, they can sell it, they can lease it, exchange it. Basically, what many of the trusts are doing is they're buying a piece of property. They're either building affordable housing on it or rehabbing a piece of property, and then they're reselling the property. So that's the buy the real property, borrow money, retain it, and then sell it. And of course, the item 4, which says you can deliver deeds and assignments, that's basically you can do all the things you legally need to do to execute a sale or to execute a buy. Employee advisors and agents. One of the things I've discovered is I was not surprised. The trusts really don't have any employees, full or part-time. On rare occasion, they'll have a part-time employee, but for the most part, they don't have any employees of the community. They do borrow employees from the community to do work for them and to help them, but they don't actually employ people. So a lot of when the trust needs specialized support and assets that they can't get from the volunteer base, or they can't get from the town staff, they go out and they hire consultants. But borrow money shows up a couple of times.
Just to enhance that point, looking at our data dashboard towns and the size of trusts for communities comparable to Westborough, Hank's right that there are very few trusts that have full-time or even part-time staff. There are a number of communities that collaborate and share staff across multiple trusts and create a regional housing office, if you will. Certainly larger trusts in larger communities, Boston, and trusts that are highly active will have full-time or part-time staff. So they do trust as a legal entity do have the ability to hire. It's really just based on the need for full-time or part-time administration.
It's not specified by, item number 7 is not specified by statute, but it would be good to make sure the trust has the ability to reimburse the town for services. If they're asking for more resources or support from the town staff, then, than the normal flexibility of budgets allows, they really ought to be able to then compensate people for that. So you could, something like you could hire the DPW to maintain a piece of property for you until you're able to do something with it, and you could reimburse them out of trust funds, just to make it easier to get leverage with the town staff. Again, that's not specified by statute, but some of the trusts have that line in their trust document, just makes it easier to make it happen. I think item 6 is a duplication. I hadn't noticed that before. We'll double check that.
Okay.
So those are the main things the trust does. Essentially, the trust becomes a developer of affordable housing. Some of the trusts have, the trusts often are able to get land transferred from the town lists of surplus lots. Sometimes they have to go out and buy land. Sometimes they go out and they buy buildings or condos or whatever, but basically they buy property, rehab it, build, and then resell as an affordable house. What all of that implies, by the way, is that the trust it's not specified or required, but in general, the trusts are not profit-making entities. They don't even operate as nonprofits. They basically, in order to accomplish the affordability of the housing that they develop, they basically take a loss on all the sales, and that's where the funding from the community ends up paying for those losses.
So I guess to honor Hank's effort on this thing, first of all, he did all the work and I did very little, but as I spoke to the issues that are listed here, when Hank was on vacation, that I did review Mass General laws, and he's absolutely correct that we have very little wiggle room in terms of what Mass General law allows relative to trusts. And I think his summary that he just gave you is as good as anybody's going to be able to do. So I give Hank basically total credit for the efforts that have been made so far in this category.
Okay. And the law does allow for at the establishment of trust or future modification to expand or limit the powers of the trust.
Yes, you can. There's a process that's very similar to the initial setting up of the process for modifying the trust or even for liquidating the trust. I think there's something about that at the end here. But what I'm talking with folks, it's as with any process that involves going modifying state or modifying legal documents that have state overview. It's a long and involved process. You want to try and avoid it if you can.
Okay. So thanks for the overview. You comfortable chatting about some of the oversight?
Yep, talk about the oversight.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
If the trust buys a piece of property, let's say, how does that come off the tax rolls?
I believe it comes off the tax rolls.
No. Okay. Would it ever go back on?
Goes back on when they sell it. However, you need to understand. Or
give it away.
Well, either sell it. Well, the trust could give it away if they chose to. Basically, they're selling it for less than $100 is what that transaction would look like.
Right.
It goes back. One of the things you need to remember. It's not important for the trust document, but if you put a DHCD deed rider on a piece of property when you sell it, you limit the tax value of the property to the sale value of the property at the initial sale, plus a small increase based on the CPI.
Okay, here by example, the Westborough Housing Trust properties that they manage and own.
The housing authority properties.
Right. Are those taxable?
I don't believe so, because that's a municipal agency. They own that property.
They're a state agency, actually, I believe, or they
Well,
report this.
No, they're under the authority of DHCD, but they are an independent government entity.
Right.
Okay,
It's just like,
Yeah,
it's,
but on
they're
that
just
basis,
like,
they would be tax exempt.
right. Just so
an analogy would be the Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission in Westborough owns a lot of property, or they have control of a lot of property. I don't know if you call it ownership, but they have control of it. They don't pay taxes.
Right. Okay, just something we should understand in case that question comes up. That's the reason I ask it.
Okay, good point. Okay. Do people have any questions or comments on the oversight and limitations? I have a few, but before I speak, I want to give folks a chance.
I think just in general, we need to have some kind of, I'll use the word schedule. That may be too structured, but at least some ways where we put in percentage amounts of the trust assets that need approval, or distribution of those need approval at different levels by different groups, such as just the trust, just the trustees, maybe the trustees and Board of Selectmen, and then even going all the way up to town meeting.
Yeah, and if you go back to the oversight and limitations,
Right.
Again, the board of what we're suggesting is most of the trusts operate this way. You need the trust is not going to get any money unless they go through town meeting.
Right.
Right. So the trust is basically going to be given periodically. The trust will come to town meeting and will ask for money, and they'll have to provide whatever level of commitment on how that money will be spent beyond that the town meeting demands at that point in time. Generally, you want to try and avoid having to go to the town meeting for a specific project. Okay,
Understand.
you want to go to because you need the flexibility. Otherwise, if you're going to go to the town meeting for every project, don't fool around with a housing trust. Just let your affordable housing committee, which has had that situation, let them go do it. Okay. So what most of the trust, what the trusts seem to do is the Board of Selectmen ends up being the governing authority that has oversight over the acquisition and or disposition of real property held by the trust. That when they go to buy a piece of property, a specific site, they go to the Board of Selectmen and say, hey, we're going to buy 49 Main Street, and here's the price we're going to pay. Is that okay with you? And the Board of Selectmen votes yes or no. That gives you some oversight. The same way when the trust goes to sell the property, i.e., hand it off to sell it to an affordable partner, they have to go to the Board of Trustees to get approval, not of the people who they're selling it to, but approval to sell it and approval of the T's and C's under which it's being sold.
Right.
Okay. Well, okay. So in my looking across about a dozen trusts, I saw 3 or 4 that put requirements for the Board of Selectmen on any transaction. There were others, most have no requirement to go back to the Board of Selectmen. And a few set thresholds so that there couldn't be a transaction. Williamstown, for example, if a transaction is going to commit 80% of the trust's available assets, then it would need to go to the Board of Selectmen. I want to say Ipswich, it's 100% of trust asset, commitment would require the Board of Selectmen. So I guess my concern with having every acquisition or disposition of real property go to the Board of Selectmen is that makes the trust more of an advisory function as opposed to the independent operating entity that it's intended to be. And so I guess I would propose that if any single project is going to commit more than 50 or 60% of assets, available assets, that it would go to the Board of Selectmen, or if a project was going to hit a cumulative 80% of assets. So you might have one big project, or you might have a small project that's going to push the trust over that 80% threshold, then you would start going to the Board of Selectmen. Is a way of providing oversight, but still allowing the trust to make decisions and operate independently. And the other part of that is, yes, so the trust will go to town meeting for transfer of funds into the trust. By statute, once the money's transferred, it's considered spent by the town. It's no longer the town's money. It belongs to the trust. Trusts can also get revenue from other places, including gifts and grants, as well as revenue that might be generated off of trust activities. So, well, the town such as CPA or inclusionary zoning, things of that nature, are certainly going to be a primary source of funding. It won't be exclusive. But my thoughts on the oversight of the Board of Selectmen is not to have every real property transaction go. Just set some thresholds to provide oversight in basically a check to make sure that the Board of Selectmen is comfortable that the trust is operating in a fiscally responsible way.
No problem with that, Alan. How about on the disposition of property, i.e. when a property is going to be sold?
Good question. I'm not sure.
I think most of the trusts just go to the Board of Selectmen to say, hey, we're going to offer this property for sale under these T's and C's.
I guess on disposition, maybe make it a concurrence vote. So, for example, if you've been watching our not yet on pay-per-view Board of Selectmen's meetings, lately we've had a number of affordable units that are ownership units that are being sold, and
right.
there's a process there where after the buyer, the seller, and DHCD all sign off that everything's in order to ensure that the affordability restrictions properly carry forward to the new owner, that it does come before the Board of Selectmen for approval, and basically that the Board of Selectmen satisfied that the rules are followed and the covenant's been protected. I think that is certainly a reasonable thing for the trust to go through as well. So that when the trust is selling a property, if it's selling a property as affordable, obviously DHCD would be involved in the covenants. The buyer, the seller, the deed restrictions all come into play, that having the Board of Selectmen provide the same level of oversight they do for any affordable unit being resold in town. The trust, I think the other question comes up, and this is for thought, and it just sort of popped into my mind, is there are trusts that have been given property. For example, one trust, I believe, got property transferred to it from the town that was taken in a tax taking. So the town foreclosed on the property for non-payment of taxes. Rather than auctioning it, they transferred the property to the trust. The trust deemed that the cost of renovation and moving that into an affordable unit was too high. So the trust did minor repairs to bring up the property to code and then sold it at market rate so that it would have the funds available for other projects, right? So I think even if our trust were to do something like that, a review and approval by the Board of Selectmen would be appropriate.
So what we can do is separate the acquisition and disposition of properties. If hey,
Yep.
disposition of real property requires a rather than using the word authorize, I can reuse the word concurrence.
Yep.
And then on the acquisition, we can put a 50% of uncommitted trust assets.
Okay. And do we want to say any one project at 50% of trust assets,
Sure,
or a cumulative commitment of
And a
80%?
cumulative 80%, yep.
Okay.
While we're talking about the funding issues and such, the other thing I did, and not all the trusts have this provision, but having talked with a few folks, they said, there are housing trusts that, well, I'm talking about under funding and financial management, item number 3.
Okay.
There are housing trusts that have become essentially inactive. They've been given money, and for whatever reason, they're not operating effectively. So you put a timer. If you get money and you haven't spent it in 5 years, it goes back to the original source. So if you get CPA money, you don't spend it for 5 years. You don't commit it for 5 years. You have to give it back, just so that we don't end up with money. Again, as you said, Alan, once the money's transferred, the town books it as being spent. So it's lost funds, if you will. You don't have it sitting there for long periods of time with nobody doing anything with it.
Okay. So I guess my concern about that is if we look at CPA funds, for example, coming into the trust. So under Mass law, under CPA, there's a minimum of 10% of CPA funds each year have to go to affordable housing. So at our current tax, so assuming a 1% CPA surcharge and our current tax levy, that would mean about $80,000 a year to the trust. And CPA funds that come into the housing trust still carry the same restrictions on utilization within the affordable housing category. So it's a narrower scope than other funds that might come into the trust. I guess my concern is that if the trust is involved in long-term planning, and looking at projects or using CPA funds for preservation activities, such as, knowing that, 10 years from now, these X number of affordable units are going to need new roofs. So we're going to bank CPA dollars to help fund those capital projects that help maintain and preserve the value and the usability of the property, that we might need more than 5 years to do that. My other concern is that the source of funds may not exist at the time, after that period. And so maybe this would need to be narrower. I guess in general, I'm against it, but negotiating, thinking about what everyone agrees on, money coming in from stabilization funds, from zoning mitigation. I believe those, I'm not sure if those can go back into those stabilization funds. What if those stabilization funds no longer exist? Zoning mitigation funds would probably just go back into the general fund of the town. I'm not sure we can even require that the town use the money for affordable housing going forward. So I guess my point is, if the trust is inactive, we can have a mechanism for the trust to be dissolved.
Alan, my understanding is that the monies are held by the town treasurer or whoever until town meeting votes a specific amount get transferred. Even for CPA, the CPA funds have to be voted to be transferred. And my understanding is they can be accumulated in a CPA account until they are voted for transfer. So what this does is it forces the trust to go to the town meeting and say, hey, in the next period of time, I'm going to spend $100,000 on a project to deliver a piece of property. And then they have to make good on that. They don't just get money flowing in there continually and don't use it or effectively implement the will of the people in creating the trust. That's all.
No, I hear that. I guess part of my view, though, is at times the trust is going to ask for money without necessarily having a specific project in mind.
Well, most of the time they will, but then they should within a reasonable, I mean, it shouldn't be going forward unless they have a plan for how they're gonna spend the money, right? I would, I mean,
Or ideas, because like, for example, come October, we're going to be asking for transfer funds to provide initial funding for the trust. And we have ideas of what types of projects we want to pursue.
we ought to have a separate conversation about asking for money in October. I'm personally uncomfortable asking for money when we can't tell the town meeting who the people are who are gonna run the trust. We don't know who the trustees are. They don't have a trust document. They haven't been organized.
Well, so we can talk about the process. So best practice is to have a trust document on file with the town clerk's office that's referenced in the warrant article, so that the declaration of trust exists. And once the general law is accepted by the bylaw is created, and with the acceptance of the general law, that the declaration of trust, the first action of the trust is actually to file the declaration with the Register of Deeds and the land court. And so,
yeah, but you're also going to have the trustees identified and ready to be appointed, right?
we would have what we believe is an initial slate of trustees, and they would be appointed at the first opportunity after town meeting. Yes. And part of that is also because there are inclusionary zoning funds that are restricted to certain types of affordable housing that'll be coming in. And we sort of want to make sure that we have the mechanism in place to be able to receive those funds appropriately.
Well, again, I was under the impression that the stabilization funds took care of that. And I mean, my preference would be to wait till Springtown meeting to ATM to actually ask for the money, and in between get the declaration of trust filed, get the trustees up and running, and be able to come and say, hey, here's our planning process or our schedule or something more than here's a number of people who are going to go spend your money wisely.
Okay, those are some good points. I think we should discuss that as a group. People, please think about that.
Now, the warrant articles asking for the establishment of the trust, that'll be a Board of Selectmen article, correct? That you will probably present, I would take a wild guess.
Probably, yes. I mean, I don't have to be the one to present it on the floor of town meeting.
I understand, but that would make the most sense. And then the Board of Selectmen, and I guess this is a discussion amongst the board, is whether they want to propose a slate of trustees at that point, or wait until to Springtown meeting, to annual town meeting.
The trustees are not approved by the town meeting. You don't want to get in a position where the trustees have to be approved by the town meeting.
No. That's not what I said. No.
I misunderstood as well.
Okay. If you wanted to go faster, like if you wanted to ask for funding, I think the point Hank brings up is appropriate, meaning people will want to know, well, who are the trustees that we're going to allow to manage or oversee however much money would be transferred into the trust. That would only be doable if the Board of Selectmen had a slate of trustees that they could announce. So I sort of agree with Hank in a sense. I'm just sort of restating things.
Okay. No, I understand that viewpoint. I do. I think I hadn't thought about it that way yet at this point. So, I mean, ideally, I'd love to have a slate of trustees identified. I think that helps in the process, so that even knowing that even just having the town know that there are people willing to step up and do this work and see who they are will help with the vote of the warrant article to create the trust. Even though the appointments wouldn't officially happen till a subsequent Board of Selectmen's meeting. I think that component is separate as far as when we look to transfer funds. What I can take is an action item is I can talk through the town manager with the get the sense of the finance team as to their thoughts about whether they would want the trust actually to transfer funds in October, November, or wait till annual town meeting. They may.
Those are all good arguments about, trying to hurry this thing up. We're talking about millions of dollars that are going to happen that are going to be in the kitty of the town for this purpose. I don't see any hurry to do it other than what's being suggested by Hank. Let's get the damn trust in place first. Let's answer specific questions associated with the trust. Mixing it up with what the trust is going to do, who the people are going to be, all in one fell swoop is a big mistake relative to the town meeting. Don't complicate what you want to do. What you want to do is get the trust created with the terms and conditions that we've discussed, and Hank has done a very good job of outlining what they are. Let's not put the cart before the horse. It's been a mistake in the past when you try to do too much at once before the town meeting. I agree with Hank. Let's do it his way.
Okay, I hear you, and we'll head that direction. The one caveat is that with the creation of the stabilization funds at the June annual town meeting, you can't accept money into a stabilization fund in the year it's voted in. So the first zoning mitigation payment from Pulte fell to free cash.
Well, okay, but let's hope that the town fathers, of which you are one of them, aren't stupid enough to release that money in anticipation of the trust being created. And by the way, if the trust is created now, obviously we can flesh out the details for the annual town meeting, which is only going to be, 5 months away or so.
Okay.
So, it's not like we're trying to get a rocket off before the end of the decade.
Okay.
Let's do it right.
Okay, I hear you, and I'm feeling that that's the consensus of everyone involved.
I hope so.
Alan, I believe that Leah told us, Leah being the town finance director, told us that the stabilization fund that we created for the Pulte money would accept the 2021 payment, not the 2020 payment, but the 2021 payment.
Correct. So it's the 2020 payment that
right,
I will check to see if they have a preference on how that's captured for affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean the 2020 payment, I think you have to go back to town meeting. It went into the general fund, and we're not the town meeting has not authorized that money to be spent.
Right.
So it's in free cash.
Right. So the question is to properly capture that money for its intent at fall town meeting.
We would have to have a warrant article.
Right. We need a warrant article, but if we're not comfortable as a trust asking for that money to go into the trust, then I would look and see if the town wanted to transfer that money into the stabilization fund.
But we could talk again. The money's in free cash, right?
Correct.
I mean, in terms of the municipal accounting, it's in free cash, so you can't. It's not as if there's a separate pool of money somewhere. It's in free cash, so you'd have to go in and ask for a transfer from free cash of an amount equal to the. And if the Board of Selectmen feels that's a good idea, they should do that. I would be surprised if the voters would be supportive.
I think the concern would be if, voters right now, we at annual town meeting given the pandemic, the economy, our whole situation that we find ourselves is that we did use some free cash to mitigate tax increase to offset, the drop in local receipts. If there is a I'll say large pool or a healthy pool of free cash, there may be a desire for people to dip again into that if we do not see local receipts. If Leah doesn't come back and say, "Hey, good news, local receipts are better than I had forecast," there may be a move to dip some more. So I think we need to see some of the numbers and what the AFC also would feel comfortable with proposing.
Yeah, I mean, I think let me talk to the finance team.
Yeah.
And see how they prefer that specific funds be handled, and get their recommendation.
I mean,
Yeah,
go ahead.
But at this point we'll proceed with creating the trust in October, November, but not, probably not looking for funding until annual town meeting in March.
Right. One thing that could be done is the AFC in their report and recommendations in expenditures and receipts report could note what free cash is, or actually in the statement of financial condition, could note what free cash is, separately footnote how much. Why? Yes, you can.
Well, you can footnote that so much of that came from a source, but
right. That
by
was
regulator, right now those funds are unencumbered. They can be used for any purpose that the town uses free cash for.
Let me finish.
Okay, sorry.
I was not going to say you could restrict it. I'm saying you footnote saying, by the way, folks, there was whatever the amount was that we originally thought might come into the stabilization fund, actually by law had to go into the general fund. You can do with it what you want. You may not say that, but it sort of earmarks it, if for no other reason, that you may not want to consider this part of free cash because the intent was, per the establishment of the stabilization fund, that would support an affordable housing trust. I'm just trying to say, make sure that you sort of pull out or at least identify a certain source so that maybe you talk about a smaller total amount of free cash. And that's up to the AFC. That's completely up to the AFC. It's their book.
Absolutely.
But I'm just saying, if you want to try to, bird dog that amount, there are mechanisms.
Okay. So back to item 3 on funding and financial management.
I can take item 3 out of there, Alan. That's not a problem.
Okay. I was going to say, are people comfortable removing it, or did we want maybe a longer time frame on the restriction? I'd like to hear from some of the other folks on the call.
How do you, more of a question, how do you identify the funds? So is it, because you're constantly having you have inflows and outflows, and to try to identify the 500,000 that came in 5 years ago, did we spend that 500,000 versus a different 500,000?
Get it? I'm not totally conversant with the details of how the municipal accounting works. However, I do know that that the finance department tracks expenditures against warrant articles for every other warrant article that I've ever seen, and they track them for eternity.
Right.
Right.
Until the money's exhausted. So they would keep track of it for us. You would know that the $100,000 you got in 2021 had not been liquidated yet.
My feeling on 3, and I voiced this when we first discussed this when Hank was on vacation, is to remove 3. And the reason for it is if we have an affordable housing need, which we clearly do, and we appoint trustees to this affordable housing trust, I mean, their job is to use that money to create affordable housing. And I think what happens is if any of this money is sitting there and is not being put to that purpose, I think the Board of Selectmen itself is beholden to create a committee that does its job. And if the majority are not willing to go forward and build stuff or acquire stuff or do the job, then they need to be removed. And I think this document includes a way to do that. So I think that 3 is unnecessary on the basis that we either get rid of the trust because we don't care that it builds anything anymore or creates affordable housing, or alternatively, that we make sure that the people who are trustees are doing the job that they were put there to do. And so I think 3 is unnecessary on that basis.
Okay. So do we have consensus to remove item 3?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. There are 2 other sort of oversight I'd like us to consider. One is modification of the trust. Under the writing of general law, a majority vote of the trust can actually change the trust. I think the town would be more comfortable if any change to the trust, first off, required maybe more than a majority of the trustees, but then also a vote of the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, a concurrence vote of the Board of Selectmen would be a good idea.
Okay. And then,
So like, Helen, a 2/3 of the trustees and a concurrence of the Board of Selectmen?
well, some trusts say majority plus 1, because the percentage might not, depending on how many trustees you have, the percentage might not be 2/3 might be the same as unanimous, right?
We can draft it up as majority plus 1 and concurrence of the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. And then for dissolution of the trust, again, it's I believe technically to dissolve the trust, it requires a vote at town meeting to remove acceptance of the trust from the bylaws. But prior to that, I'm trying to see, Hank, you had a note.
Yeah, well, again, trust may be terminated by a majority vote of the town meeting in accordance with MGL Chapter 4. I must have there must be a typo there.
That's section 4B.
Yeah,
Okay.
section 4B.
The question is, would we want to predetermine or have, a vote of the trust itself for dissolution, or in the Board of Selectmen as part of that process?
I mean,
Some trusts require a vote of the Board of Selectmen. Now, granted, if it's going to town meeting, in most cases it would be coming from the Board of Selectmen, but you could also end up with a citizen's petition.
which you
Well,
could end
either
up
way,
with
it's
anyway,
a
right?
vote at the town meeting. So if it's a vote of the town meeting, which we generally believe is the process, because that's the reason why we have a town meeting, 1 vote, 1 person. I don't see that we need to complicate it. Wherever that article was created and brought before town meeting, the Board of Selectmen, if they chose not to go with the flow, that is to remove the trust, they certainly would speak to that on the floor. And I think historically, with the support of the Finance Committee, that's the way the vote would turn out. So
Okay,
I don't think we need to get too protective here.
So the reason some trusts have a vote of the Board of Selectmen prior to the town meeting vote is that it prevents an activist group who's against a particular project of the trust from launching a citizen's petition to dissolve the trust to stop the project. Because if the declaration of trust requires a vote of the Board of Selectmen, then a citizen's petition alone would not be sufficient to dissolve the trust.
Well,
Well, it still has to go to town meeting.
yeah,
And in
I'm
fact-
surprised the town council let them put that in the declaration of trust, because it sounds like you're allowing some the trust document to override Mass General Law, but I'm not an attorney, so I may be
Okay.
wrong.
Okay. I mean, so I'm raising the issue, but it sounds like there's not a consensus that that's a concern. We should just leave it as, it would be, I believe it's a 2/3 majority of town meeting because it's a change to the bylaws.
Well,
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, Mass General Law is the protection here with, in effect, whatever the required vote is of town meeting. And as you said, if it's a change in the bylaws, it's a 2/3 vote. So I'm happy with that. I think that's protection enough. You know, and generally, in my experience at town meeting, is that when there's a vested interest that shows up, it doesn't last very long. In other words, I've seen the vote turn on things like that just because it's a vested interest. And you know, these, as we heard in a couple of meetings before, the fact is that, you know, this isn't going to reduce the property value, and in fact, those that are in favor of affordable housing will actually see additional money supplied by the state to offset the if you will, the income deficit caused by lower rental values. So, you know, I mean, I think we're being overprotective of the purpose here.
Okay. Okay. So we'll leave it where it is.
Yeah, Alan, you implied that we're gonna write the trust document into the town bylaws. I mean, some towns have done that. I would suggest you don't want to write the trust document into the town bylaws, because then if you want to change the trust document, you got to change the town bylaws.
No, agreed. It's that the way the trust gets created is we accept the Chapter 44, Section 55
right
as a bylaw of the town.
Okay.
Within Article 10 of our bylaws. And so in dissolving the trust, we'd have to remove that acceptance.
Yep. Okay. I understand. Thank you.
So it's literally a line item. And for, you know, there were people who were concerned that, you know, when, you know, the Westborough Housing Authority used to be part of the charter, which meant every time state law changed about housing authorities, technically we were supposed to amend our charter to be compliant. That was changed about almost a decade ago or 8 years ago to basically just accept the state statute for housing authorities as a bylaw of the town, so that if the state changes the law, the bylaw automatically changes, and it would work that way for the trust as well. The simplest process. Two other questions I had for the group on this, and then we're running short on time, so we're going to shuffle things a little bit. But the removal of trustees. Some trusts, you know, obviously it's the 2-year alternating term by statute. Some trusts have a provision that trustee explicitly state the trustees can resign. Obviously they can. That there's a residency requirement, and a few trusts say that if a trustee misses a certain number of consecutive meetings, all the ones I've read have said 5 consecutive meetings, that's considered to be a resignation. I'm putting it out there. Are those things things we want to consider? My recommendation on residency would be follow the other bylaws of the town that say on committees that say you have to be a resident unless you have a specific level of expertise that's key to the operation of the committee. Is one thought. I'm not even sure I'm recommending it. It's one thought, or keep the residency requirement. And then the other is, do we want to consider a certain number of consecutive missed meetings to be the effective resignation? Any thoughts?
I don't like that idea. I mean, we're busy people, okay? And if you want to be on a committee, I believe you understand that you have an obligation to do the job. I can't remember what the general process is to remove people from a committee, but it is possible within the town bylaws. So, you know, and certainly if a person wasn't there and the Board of Selectmen an individual like yourself calls the person and says, you know, it would be in the best interest of the town if you resigned. You know, I would rather have it soft rather than the hammer that is being suggested. Because
Okay, well, I'm just raising it as something I've read. I'm not saying I'm a proponent of it yet.
What I was suggesting, Alan, is that we would hold the chair of the committee responsible to go to the Board of Selectmen and say, hey, Sam Jones isn't able to perform his duties appropriately. I would appreciate it if you would remove him, and the appointing authority then can remove the person and replace him.
yeah, I agree with Hank. That's the way to do it.
Okay.
And I agree, Alan, on the residency requirement. There's no need to put a redundant requirement in there. The town has an overarching requirement and a set of guidelines on who can be on committees. Let's just follow that.
Excellent.
Does that include the ability, that overarching statement to include specialists if they're needed?
Yeah, the town bylaw
Okay.
enables you to have again, the appointing authority has the judgment.
That's fine. That's fine.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. This was a very productive discussion. We're coming up on about 9:20 right now, which doesn't leave us much time. As I said, times were approximate. Doesn't leave us much time to review draft 5. So, Ed, if you can provide a high-level summary of what's been added. I might, if there are any key comments, we can handle those now, but if not, if people can get Ed comments in writing over the next, or send them to me to distribute out to everyone over the next couple days, we can work to move forward and continue working on the document and getting it closer to finished.
Right. I can give you a real, I just need like 3 minutes.
Okay.
Basically, there's a section, or basically it's a page on the Westborough Housing Authority, which I fleshed through with, although I didn't hear back from Linda Strand or Joan. I think we're probably good to go with that. Did some of the stuff that you gave me, Alan, on mission, guiding principles, and near-term priorities were added to section 6. I've been working on some formatting. I've numbered all the charts and tables in section 3, to be consistent. Started to give them numbers in case they have to be done. The other thing I've done is I've been working with John Steinberg to try to determine availability of developable land parcels, and he just got me late yesterday afternoon from all the residentially zoned, developable parcels, a list of what's either been spoken for already, and which ones are sort of open, which is very limited. So I will be adding that as part of the, there's a small section on barriers to affordable housing. So I have both our infrastructure issue with sewer and the other issue, which I've incorporated, and the other is the just availability of land if we were to build as opposed to acquire and renovate. So that's about all. Once again, I would ask people just, read it, make sure that it's readable, whatever. We'll be doing final wordsmithing and things like that at some point. But really the next step is to try to, I think the key thing is to get Hank, if you can get me what you believe is the final version on section 4, that per the discussion today, appreciate that, and I'll move that in. And then what we really, I'll work on the last section, which is really just references to various data sources, websites, et cetera, and then I think the action plan. Or that's the appendix. I'm sorry. On section 5, we need or 6, whatever the action plan is, we need to get that fleshed out. So, Alan, you and I can discuss that. Yeah, go ahead, Hank.
One comment. I mean, somewhere along the line, I would think it'd be valuable to have an executive summary at the beginning of this section. Says, hey, what's the affordable housing problem that this information articulates and explains, and then how does the housing trust attack that problem or make progress in solving that problem? You know, a paragraph or two that just kind of summarizes what all this means.
There's an executive, do you mean, there is an executive summary in the,
Whether we put it in the executive summary of the document, or I would even put it like an executive summary or a prologue in this section explaining, you know.
which section are you referencing?
In the section you're dealing with here, section.
The action
whatever.
plan.
In this, all the data is confusing if you don't understand what the problem is.
Well, there's section 5, which is what actually your number, you should change yours because we added an executive summary and an introduction. So everything's moved up by 1. So you're really, the Affordable Housing Trust is section 5. Section 6 is the action, recommendation and action plan. Which has,
I'll pick, maybe we just need to put it in the executive summary so folks can understand what the problem is we're trying to solve.
I agree. I think that's where it belongs. And we have that as being done after everything else has been done.
Right, I understand, great.
Okay.
So that's all I have unless there's questions.
Okay. And so at this point, you're still looking for additional feedback or any wordsmithing?
Absolutely. You know, I will, I think we'll take care of that, what do we call it? The workforce definition and maybe a little commentary on that, you know, per what I sent you yesterday, Alan.
Yep. Okay. And I'll share with you the frequently asked questions that we're putting up on the Co-Urbanize site. Because I've got a definition of workforce housing there as well.
Okay, we just need to agree on a consistent.
Yeah, I think depending on who you ask, it's 60 to 120, or it's 80 to 120, or it's 60 to 130.
Right.
In Massachusetts, there are workforce housing programs that go up to 135%.
Right.
So it's in the FAQ, we're sort of saying it's generally 60 to 120, but in Massachusetts, there are programs that go up to 135, right?
I think that's fine.
And it'll give people a good sense of what that means. Okay, cool. So to wrap things up, do people have other issues, items, or concerns that we should be addressing as far as the process or where we are or next steps?
No.
Okay. So then for action items, I have a couple of action items to check back with the town and the finance team to just check to make sure they don't have a specific preference or are looking for us to do any specific funding of the trust at special fall town meeting. Hank is going to, and we'll work with Steve, and they'll update the trust information, the oversight limitations, the governance, and the funding and fiscal management component. We'll work on, Hank is going to speak to advisory finance committee to decide if they'd like a general presentation before we come forward with the warrant article or articles, or at that time when we come forward. I will reach out to the planning board and some of the other committees that have asked us to present to start seeing about getting on their calendar. Ed and I, and anyone else who wants to help, will pull together a short 10, 12 minute slide presentation on what we're doing and why, with the focus on why we want to trust and what it will do for the town. And then I will get draft minutes out to everyone to review and get, just so folks are aware, I'll remind you that the documents we reviewed today will be available on the town website, on our page on the town website. as well as on the Co-Urbanite site when that gets launched. I've been posting our draft documents for transparency, and so the general public can see where we are in the discussion process. And so I'll get that handled as well. Did I miss any action items or next steps? Okay, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so roll call vote. I'm going to go in reverse order this time based on my grid. So Valeria.
Yes.
Steve.
Brett, yes.
Rouch.
Yes,
Am I mispronouncing your name?
that's fine, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. Bain.
Bain, yes.
And Edinburgh, yes. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Westborough TV, for the live broadcast, as well as making the recording available to the public.